Okay, there's a lot to do in this week's Parsha show, so I'm going to begin. It's a jam-packed Parsha, and primarily we'd like to talk about some of the fundamental ideas that begin to develop here in the direction of Am Yisrael and in the relationship or the providence and guidance of Hashem in Am Yisrael. But there's a lot here, so let's do a quick overview as we usually do, and then we'll try to jump in to some of the topics that we have. The Parsha begins with Yaakov trying to settle back in Eretz Yisrael, or at the time Canaan. Yosef is 17, his older brothers are 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, so just they're just a young family. And Binyamin, a few years younger. And Yosef has these dreams. The brothers can't stand the relationship Yaakov has with Yosef. They can't stand the relationship Yosef has with them. And as he tells them the dreams, they say, you want to be, you're trying to be king over us. And as such, they hated him. They went out to pasture one day, and Yosef comes with a message from their father to check on them. They think he's coming to hurt them, and they decide to kill him. Instead of killing them, Reuven says, that's not appropriate. They get, he saves the life, and they send up his Yosef's life, and they end up selling him, or he ends up getting sold as essentially a slave down to Egypt. In Egypt, he's in the house of Potiphar. He is very successful in the house of Potiphar, but the wife of his master tries to seduce him, and he refuses and ends up being put into prison. In between, Yehuda, who had decided to be the one to save Yosef from death by selling them into slavery, Yehuda gets married, has children. Those children marry, and there's a whole episode of Yehuda where two of his sons die while married to Tamar. And then Tamar seduces him because he wouldn't let the youngest son Shelah marry her, and eventually they have these twins from that occurrence. So we have Yehuda's struggles, and we have Yosef struggles in Mitzrayim, and he's put into prison. And in prison, again, there are dreams, but this time there are two dreams by other prisoners, and he interprets the dreams for them and then asks them to remember him as they leave, or the one as he leaves, to help him get out, and says, look, I'm a foreigner, I did nothing wrong, and I was taken out of my homeland. This is the overview of a very quick overview of the many very deep and important parts of this week's Parsha. I'd like to start from the beginning, go through and look at some steps, some of it, and hopefully touch on some of the depth of what is going on here. The Parsha begins with Yaakov. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. It first introduces Yaakov settling in the land of Canaan, but it doesn't say that he just settled in or tried to settle in Canaan, but rather be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan, in the land of the dwelling of his fathers. Now, it uses megurei aviv, and lagur throughout Tanakh means someone who's temporarily somewhere. We say this in the Haggadah. We say that with Am Yisrael, that we only went to Mitzrayim to be sojourners there, whatever sojourners means, but temporarily living there, not to remain there. And the word is megure. So Rashi here tells us from the Midrash a very important idea. Bikesh Yaakov leshev b'shalva. Vayeshev Yaakov. Yaakov dwelt. He sat down. He had a long life. He's not a young man anymore. At this point, Yaakov is over 100 years old. He thinks, okay, I had struggles. I had troubles with Yaakov, with Esav, with Lavan. It is now time to settle and to have some peace in my old age. But it wasn't to be, because it actually is not yet time for Am Yisrael to settle. It is still struggle time for the nation. As Abraham was promised, that the next generations are going to struggle and be in exile. And this is really the beginning point of the exile. Yet Yaakov wants to be settled and to be calm and to have it in peace. That is that is not to be. Yaakov could not have that peace. And so the next part of the story tells us that even though Yaakov sought to dwell in peace in the same place that his ancestors were really just foreigners, were really not in their homeland yet, he wanted to be for him a homeland, but it wasn't to be. Eile toldos Yaakov Yosef. These are literally the descendants of Yaakov, and we talked about this multiple times now by Noach and by Yitzchak. When it says toldos, it doesn't necessarily mean just the descendants. And in fact, here it doesn't really mention the descendants, but rather it's Elu toldos Yaakov. These are the occurrences, the life happenings of Yaakov. Now, previously with Yitzchak and with Noach, it told us the great acts that they had. Here, Yosef is through which so much of the greatness we see. Yaakov has already done so much. He's come up from the young man that he was to become the accomplished person that he was when he struggled to the elevated state where he struggled last week with the angel of Esav, and was able to be both physical and spiritual, a human being that was balanced. Here, Yosef is going to be the next step, and that is going to be the epitome of what Yosef's giving over to his children. And so the toldos, the descendants, really are the occurrences, the life happenings of Yaakov. And Yosef is going to play the primary role. The Yosef, however, is a struggle in and of itself. Yosef ben Sheva Esrei Shana, he's 17 years old. And he was a shepherd like his other brothers in the father's sheep. But it says, V'hu na'ar es b'nei Bila es b'nei Zilpa nashei aviv. It's interesting that here Bila and Zilpa are called the wives of his father. Definitely from Yosef's perspective, they were equal wives. But V'hu na'ar, he was a lad, literally, he was a young person together with these children, with the others. It's a fascinating thing, and here Sefornu tells us a fabulous commentary, very thoughtful commentary on the Torah of Rabbi Avadia Sefornu, a 16th century Italy from Sefornu, and he says that what is the meaning of a na'ar, a youth, a lad, right? So the word na'ar is from the root of air, being awake, vibrant, the vibrancy of youth, but also na'ar lena'er, to shake. It is unstable vibrancy. Youth, the sign and symbol of youth is the ability to be totally dedicated to something, but without the perspective, without a long view, without the ability to see the results and the long and taking a long road. Youth want answers immediately. They want results immediately, both because they don't have the experience. I don't have the experience of life to be able to see and know the results of actions. So even good things are done in a way that they can't see the results that may be a fault or may actually hinder the goal itself. And two, they for youth, it's such a short amount of time that they've been aware of their life that waiting a year, 2, 3 is an eternity. You don't have the time for that. Whereas for someone who has a longer experience in life, there's more opportunity to reflect and to see that playing the long game is going to actually be more fruitful and have greater results. So Yosef is a Na'ar. Yosef, as intelligent as he was, and later we see greatly intelligent, nevertheless at this point doesn't have the experience. He's rash, and he is and cannot see the result of his actions. But Hunar, the Torah calls him out as being a youthful. And as such, the pasuk result, it says, "Vayaveh Yosef dibasam ra el aviyam." Yosef would tattle. Yosef would be someone who would constantly be talking negatively about others to his father. Constantly, I say constantly, I mean enough that was something that made it into the verse, made it into a headline about the occurrence of Yosef. The next verse, V'Yisrael ahavetz Yosef mikol banav. Interestingly, as we mentioned last week briefly, here we encounter again Yaakov's name turning to Yisrael. So we're at the beginning of chapter 37, and we're now on verse 3. Yaakov is called Yisrael. And this is important because throughout the stories of the next few weeks, we will see his name change. Yaakov, Yisrael. Yaakov, Yisrael. Yisrael is always the name of when he's in a state, an elevated state, a state of redemption, a state of ability to balance the physical and spiritual, a place of completion. And Yaakov is that struggle, the heel, in the journey, still not there yet, where he's somewhat oppressed, somewhat broken, and those two names, Yaakov, the heel, Yisrael, the master. Here it says Yaakov twice, and then it says V'Yisrael ahavetz Yosef, and Yisrael, he loved Yosef. It tells us that the love for Yosef was from a place of recognition of the role to be played in this family. He has the tradition and the promise from Hashem that his children, his descendants, are going to become the nation of Hashem. And so this is important to him. And he has a son who he realizes has the ability to carry that forward. And Yosef becomes a father of tribes of his own. And Yosef, as we saw in the previous weeks, is a replacement for Esau. And so not only Yaakov loves Yosef, but Yisrael, the personality or the state of being of the recognition of the great role Am Yisrael is to have, the promise of Am Yisrael, and that state of completeness and redemption, loved Yosef more than the others. And yet, even though that this came from a place of deep spiritual understanding of the role of Yosef in the creation of Am Yisrael and the role of Yosef as a leader amongst the nation, nevertheless, the Midrash calls out Yaakov and tells us that we must learn from here never to create strife among siblings by showing greater love or any form of affection or appreciation or preference to one child over another, regardless of what the reasons are. It is a very powerful message and a very potent one, because we see how broken the story gets after this. It is an important lesson, and as the Midrash Chazal always teach us lessons from not only the great acts, but also from the ones that don't turn out that great, right? We learn from all aspects of our ancestors, matriarchs and patriarchs, and here from Yaakov we learn this important lesson that we should never create strife within a home by showing preference to one over the other. And verse 4 says that indeed the brothers saw that the father liked them more, and they hated him, and they could not speak in peace with him, which tells us a great characteristic about them. They were not cunning, they were truthful, they were honest in their relationship, and they could not speak. If their hearts were not complete with Yosef, they could not speak that way with him either. It didn't lead to a great ability to mend the ways. And so this is an important balance that we have to know. Not to be passive aggressive, not to hold grudges, but when you talk to someone, show them this, this great, nice face, but then in your heart, you have a struggle with them. It's important. The Torah tells us later, Lo tisnas achicha belevecha, do not hate your brother in your heart. It is important that when there's an issue, to talk it through. That's the second part of this first. Don't be honest. Be true to work it through. Be true to the issues so that you can work it through. And as we will see, the deepest part of this struggle, the saddest part of what came about because they couldn't bring themselves to talk through the issues, and in fact didn't talk it through. And so they built this perspective of Yosef that was incorrect and untrue. And as most of these, as most struggles go, it usually is where you create the narrative in your own mind because you don't take the time to work through with the other what they're really doing, what they really mean, and how you can work it out with them. Yosef, unbeknownst to him, not realizing or not seeing the issues that were coming up, he had a dream. Now, this dream is essentially a prophecy as we see it come to be. And this is true about many dreams, but not all. That there's a grain or some level of messaging within dreams. It's hard for us to take those messages because we don't understand what they mean. And also perhaps we don't have that spiritual connection to have that dream. We don't have that mental spiritual space to connect in that way. And dreams are a minuscule part of prophecy, but only if someone is within the space that they could be attaining this. Yosef had that. And as such, he now had a prophecy to tell his brothers, and he thought it was important to tell them. And of course, that didn't go over well. They were bundling, they were building together, they were in unison, they were in a circle. He thought he was telling them, we work together, but they saw it as, you want to be our leader. And so they hated him even more. He had another dream, understanding that the light of the sun of Yaakov will shine off of all the others. And the moon and the stars are all there. And so he saw he was trying to tell them the magnitude of the position that they all play, in reflecting Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov into the descendants that are to come. But all they heard was, you want to be our leader. And it's interesting, in verse 11, Vayikana be'achav, the brothers were jealous. They also took it seriously. They recognized that there may be something about Yosef worthy of that leadership. And that caused jealousy. There is hardly ever jealousy when something doesn't really exist. When something is not real. When the other is not in a real space. When somebody thinks that they have something, but they don't. We're not jealous of that. The jealousy the brothers had is because they recognized that indeed he had characteristics of leadership. But he was rubbing it in their face, and that was too hard, and that became a jealousy. But Yaakov, not speaking it to his children, Shamar Sadavar, he guarded it. He waited for this to come to be because he also recognized Yosef's ability for leadership. But as opposed to Yosef, who didn't didn't have a perspective that was far-reaching. So he was nar, he was foolish, he was childish, and so he just said it right away. Yaakov kept it in his heart. He waited for the time that would actually come to be. The next section tells us about the very tragic and really terrible story of the brothers deciding to kill Yosef, putting him in a pit, and ultimately selling him into servitude, or at least choosing to, deciding to. Whether they did or not is unclear. So the brothers go out to Shechem to pasture. As we saw last week, Yaakov had an enormous amount of cattle and flock, sheep, goats, etc. And Yisrael, again, Yaakov in an elevated state, tells Yosef, recognizing that this is a time for Yosef to represent the tradition of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It says, your brothers are out in pasture in Shechem. This is verse 13. Go, and I will send you as my messenger. And because I send you, they will not harm you. Everything will be fine. Go as my messenger. And Yosef says, Hineni, I am ready to do your bidding. And he says, go check on your brothers, see how they are, their peace, the peace of the sheep, and come back and tell me. The end of the verse says, Vayishlacheu me'emek Chevron vayavo Shechema. He sent him from the depth, from the valley of Chevron, and he came to Shechem. Rashi points out from the Midrash says that actually Chevron is on a mountain. Chevron is not a valley. What does it mean? He sent him from the valley of Chevron. They were in the mountain of Chevron. So Rashi says that actually the emek here, the depths of what was meant to be. This is the promise. This is the beginning of the promise that Yaakov, that Abraham got, that your descendants will go down to a foreign land and will be oppressed over there. And this is the beginning of that occurrence. This is what's about to happen. Rashi seems to be telling us from a midrash that, this was meant to be. You can't hold anybody accountable for what happened because after all, this was the promise. This was meant to be. But the truth is not so at all. And throughout the midrash and throughout history, we know that the actions of the brothers is something that we do hold them accountable for, and we are carrying that. We carry that as a national, I don't want to say sin, a national part of our history, part of who we are. So what does Rashi mean? This is a very important part of our understanding Hashem's ways in the world. If we look at the world, there are definitely things that need to happen and constantly do happen because they're meant to be, because there's a prophecy it's going to happen, because this is the direction that Hashem wants of the world. But exactly how it plays out is up to human choice. There are so many things that need to happen in the world in order for the advancement of what the will of Hashem is, for people to become better, for the Torah to be spread, for the perspective of Hashem's perspective of the universe and the purpose of living to come to be. That requires so many historical occurrences. But exactly how people play that out is their own choice. Yaakov, to quote the Midrash, Yaakov would have gone down to Egypt one way or another. Either Hashem would have had him chained, brought down to Yerushalayim, to Egypt, to Mitzrayim, meaning somehow he would have forcibly been taken, or he could have gone willingly. And he went willingly because Yosef was the leader. And to get there, how did Yosef become the leader? There were many avenues that could have happened. The way it did happen was the choice of his brothers in their actions here. It didn't have to happen this way. But the depth of what happened was because it was the will of Hashem, and it was a promise beforehand and a prophecy. And so this is where that turns to be. How it would have happened, what was the alternative script? What would have happened if the brothers had not chosen to act this way? It would have happened too, just in a different way. Perhaps Yosef would not have been enslaved. Perhaps he would have gone down as an advisor just because of the economics. Who knows? We only know the story that happened, not that one that didn't. But the result is, and this is the depth of what Rashi is quoting from the Midrash here. The result of what's about to be set in motion here was meant to be and was going to happen regardless. The steps along the way were the choices of the humans involved. Vayimtza'ehu ish, we're in verse 15. Vayimtza'ehu ish v'hino ter basadeh, vayishaleo ish le'mor matavakesh. And a man found him, and he was struggling to find his way in a field, meaning he had gotten lost. He's looking for his brothers, and this man asks him, "Matavakesh, what are you seeking?" And he responds in a most profound, deep sense of what the essence of this story is. Vayomer et achai anochi mevakesh. I seek my brothers. He sees them as his brothers, and he seeks to have that relationship. He seeks to be a brother to his brothers. Where are they pasturing? Yosef can't see where his mistakes have led to a fissure, to a schism between him and his brothers that is at a turning point, at a breaking point. He says, I seek my brothers. And the man says, oh, they traveled from here, meaning they are not at the same place you're at. You seek brotherhood. They don't. For I heard they said, let us go to Dosan. And Yosef said, I will go and find them there. And this is a little bit more detail that we find anywhere else in the Torah. A conversation at some stop midway. What are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers. Oh, tell me where they're pasturing. Oh, they're out. And they moved on to Dosan, to a different place. Okay, I'm going to go to Dosan. So Ramban Nachmanides, 12th century in Spain, writes over here in his most monumental and profound commentary on Torah that is so essential. He writes, and I'll read it in the Hebrew and translate. Vayarich hakasav hazeh. This verse is seemingly too long. Lahagid, it comes to tell us, kisibos rabos boe lov shayiroi lachzar. He had many reasons that he could have turned back and said, Dad, I went, I looked, they weren't there. Or I asked someone and they said, oh, they moved on somewhere else. And yet he did everything because his father had told him to do it. And furthermore, ki hagzera emes, because that which is the will of the divine is going to happen. The result of what was supposed to happen here was set in motion. And so the players are going to play certain parts because that's the will. The responses don't have to be the ones they chose to do. But Yosef, being responsible, he could have turned around, but that would have ended the story. But something was supposed to happen. And so he didn't turn around. He continued doing what he needed to do, which eventually brought about a tragedy for him, a tragedy for the brothers, but the result of the creation of Am Yisrael. And this is a very profound idea. Sometimes, in hindsight, we can look back and see how certain things that happened, that I don't know why I did that. I don't know why that happened that way, but it resulted in something monumentous. And this right here, the Torah is telling us a lot of detail because it was a turning point. It was something that didn't have to happen this way. And Yosef could have turned around and said, Dad, I went out there. You said to go to Shechem. I went to Shechem. They're not there. I got lost all through Shechem. And I asked someone, and they said, oh, they moved on to somewhere else to do something. But he didn't. He went on. And that was faithful. But that's a part of the lesson we learn, that there's a guiding hand, even as the brothers made choices to assist the guiding hand in a way that was inappropriate. But there's a guiding hand. Ultimately, the history that needed to happen, Am Yisrael's becoming a nation in Mitzrayim, needed to happen. It was foretold to Avraham, and here it's set in motion by Yosef listening and taking the guidance and asking questions, and the Torah detailing the conversations that really are usually not there. The next verse, verse 18, tells us 2 points that are so profound in whenever we see struggle. The Torah tells us something, and again, we're going to have to look at Seforno, Rabbi Avadia Seforno, who mentioned earlier. The words are, I'm going to translate, Vayiros ha'merechok, 18, and the brother saw him from a distance. Ubiterem yikrav aliyam, and before they could come close, he could come close to them. Vayisnaklu oso lahamiso. The Hebrew, I don't know which translation you're looking at, but the translations usually say, and they schemed against him to kill him. But that's not the correct translation. In the Hebrew, it's reflexive. If it were to say that they schemed against him, it would say vayinaklu, and they schemed. It's reflexive. They allowed him to become a schemer. In their mind, they interpreted him. He's coming here to kill us. We must kill him preemptively. How could they come to that conclusion? The beginning of the verse tells us. There was a Hasidic Rebbe, the Kutzker Rebbe, who translated the first part of this verse in a most profound way. Vayiro osa merachok, the brothers saw him from a distance. They could not see him up close. They didn't converse and get to know him and understand him. It is easy to caricature someone and characterize them and make a personality that we want to interpret on them from a distance, because you don't get to know the person. They had ceased to have a relationship with Yosef. They could not speak to him in peace, and as such never got to know his real true intentions and understanding, to understand where he's coming from and why he's saying this and what does he mean, and that he really does want peace and brotherhood. But they didn't get to know that. They didn't get to know that because they only saw him from a distance. And from a distance, you can interpret someone else's actions so much so that you can make them into a schemer to kill you. And you must preemptively protect yourself. It's not a defense of them, but it gives us an understanding as to why they thought they have to kill him. Because in this distance, they thought that he was a danger to them. And it's a very powerful lesson for us. So often we struggle with people because the struggle makes it so that we don't want to talk to them. And if we don't talk to them, we don't hear their pure intentions and correctly, and we don't learn to work with them because we've already broken with them, see them from a distance, and that allows us to caricature them and redefine in our own mind and to us who they are, when in reality it's something else entirely. It's a very powerful lesson in working on shalom. When we work for peace, we have to get to know the other. Don't see your brother from afar. See them from close up. Get to know them. Speak with them for peace. And you will learn that not to characterize them in your own mind in a certain way. And that's precisely what they did here. And it's such a deep message in the brokenness and how we can fix it. How we have to learn from that to see someone from close up. Now they said, let's go kill him. And we'll throw him into a pit. And we'll say that he was eaten. And then we'll see what happens with his dreams. Again, they think the dreams are indicative of him trying to hurt them. However, Vayishma Reuven v'yatzilei miyadam. Reuven heard and says, no, that's not the right thing to do. I have to save our brother. Vayomer lo naken enough. She says, no, we will not kill him. He says, rather, al tishbechu dam, don't try and kill him. Hashlicheu el habor hazeh, put him into the pit for now. But don't, v'yad al tishlechu bo, don't put a hand against him. Laman, and the Torah tells us, why did he do this? Laman hatzilo so miyadam la'ashiv alav, because he wanted to save him from their brothers and take him home. But he didn't try right away to save him. He said, don't kill him, put him in the pit, we'll decide what to do. And then he leaves, goes back to dad, comes back, and he's gone. But the Midrash, again, the Talmud tells us something very deep here. Talmud tells us that Reuven had no clue the power of his own actions. The way the Midrash, the Gemara tells us this is very powerful. It says, if Reuven had known that he would be quoted in the Torah, that he would be characterized here as seeking to save his brother, he would have carried his brother on his shoulders with musical instruments back to his father to save him. Meaning to say, sometimes we underestimate what it is that we can do. Reuven, had he known how eternal his action would be, he would have gone further and greater. But underestimating himself, he said, we're not going to do that. Put him in the pit, let's decide what to do. The Torah tells us what his intention was. He wanted to save his brother. His intentions were pure and good. But he didn't go all the way because he underestimated the eternal value of his own action. Talmud is trying to tell us, sometimes we hesitate. We have more to do. And if we would realize the strength and the value and the eternal purpose of what we do, we would do more, and we would do it greater, and we would do it better. But we don't, because we can't see that. And it's empowering, and it really is demanding. It's empowering because it gives us the ability to do good things better, but it's demanding because it says, don't underestimate. What'd you say, Jacob? I can't hear you, you're on mute.
I just said, you must.
Right, you must do it. That's right. It's demanding because if we were to understand the value of the things we do and the lasting impact it has, then we would act greater. If we had hindsight and we were able to see what Reuven would have been able to see, reading the verse about himself in the Torah, he'd like to go back and say, okay, I'm going to do this better. I want to put him on my shoulder and carry him home back to dad and say, look, I saved your son. Not I saved your son. Here's your son. Right? It's not about the glory for the self. It's about the impact. And it's a very powerful lesson. The Torah is telling us what Reuven's intentions were, but there was more that could have been done. And if only we would learn that lesson. However, they threw him into the pit. They and they felt that they had done the right thing. They had saved their own lives, and they sit down to eat, which is considered a very callous act, and they're held to task again. For in verse 25, after they throw him into the pit, they sit down and eat. Even if you are right. There's a halacha that if a court, if a Beit Din is dealing with a capital crime, then a capital punishment, meaning they are sentencing someone to death, they have to fast that day. They can't eat. Right? You have to feel, you have to understand and take this seriously. Here they are. Perhaps they felt they were right, but where's the compassion? Where's the heart? Where's the care? And they're held to task about that as well. In any case, in the next section, it's unclear who took Yosef out of the pit and sold them. Was it the brothers who decided to do it, but someone else took him out and sold him, took him into captivity? Exactly how this story happened is very unclear in the verses, and there are different interpretations. Either way, Yosef is sold as a slave, and Reuven comes back to the pit, and Yosef is gone. And he tears his garments, and he comes back to his brothers and said, the lad, the child is not there. He calls his younger brother, 17 years old, a child. He recognized that the mistakes Yosef was doing were coming from his youth as a child. And now, ani ana aniba, where can I go? How will I respond? How can I hold myself responsible? How can I face my failure in responsibility? So they send this shirt back to, and Yaakov tears his garments and he cries, and they try and console him, but he's inconsolable. The end of the chapter, verse 36 says, and the end is, Yosef is sold to Potiphar in Mitzrayim, one of the ministers within Paro's palace. We have the occurrence of Yehuda. The Torah now tells us the story of Yehuda. This is a story that takes many years, but as most of these stories, they're not done chronologically, but rather in chunks. And so Reuven's story is here in a chunk, even though that it happens over many, many years, because Yehuda gets married, he has children, his children get married, and then he doesn't allow the third one to marry Tamar. So this is going on. This is a long section before it goes back to the story of Yosef. But it begins with Vayhi be'esahi vayered Yehuda me'esachav. Yehuda went down from his brothers. Yehuda took a leadership role in the struggle with Yosef, and this is something that is eternal. If we call it the struggle, or the two strengths between Yehuda and Yosef. Yosef represents the physical. He's the prince, he's the king, he's the physical king. He's the one, mashbir, later on, he's the one who gives sustenance. Yehuda is the spiritual line, the spiritual king of Am Yisrael. The Davidian line, the kings of Malchus Beis David, Mashiach, all that's from Yehuda. Yehuda and Yosef throughout Tanakh are at a balance with each other, a counterbalance. Even when Yosef, he doesn't know that Yosef is that the visor, the one he's talking to in Egypt. It's Yehuda who steps forward. These are the two powers that are constantly at struggle with each other. And then when the 12 tribes split into two kingdoms, it again is the staff of Yosef, Ephraim, from Yosef, and Yehuda that are at odds and break apart. So these are the two parts. And so Yehuda was the one who stepped up and suggested we have to get rid of Yosef. And when they saw, they came back and they realized what they had done. and they see the angst of their father and the anguish of their father, Yehuda lost his stature. Vayered me'esachav. Yehuda lost who he was. And he had to leave, and he had to go out and find himself anew. He had to find who he was. How does he do that? The Torah tells us a long story of how he finally got himself back. He had to redeem himself, and he did in one of the most profound stories that the Torah tells us. Yehuda was the first one, Hodeh, the first one to admit publicly to a mistake, to take responsibility for one's own actions. In this story, he has children, and the two children die, married to Tamar. They has a third son, Shelah, and he refuses for Tamar to marry that brother to establish the family name. And he says, "Oh, he's too young. Wait." Instead of saying, "No, you're not going to marry Shelah," he says, "Wait." And she waited and realized it wasn't happening, and so she played the role of a woman on the crossroads. And Yehuda came to her and gave her his staff, his belt, and his signet ring. And then she took it. And when she became pregnant from Yehuda from that time, and Yehuda was told, "Oh, your daughter-in-law, who's waiting for your son Shelah to become an adult so she can marry him, actually became pregnant during this time, and that's a breach to you." And he says, "All right, death penalty." And she, not willing to save her life by embarrassing him, doesn't say, "It was you," but rather says something very profound. That's her strength, Tamar's strength of saying, "Can you recognize these, and perhaps you know whose these are, because it is from that person that I'm pregnant." This is in at the end of the chapter, verse 25. Chapter 38, verse 25.
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Are most Jews today descendants of Yehuda? Is that correct? And Levi as well?
The 10 tribes were exiled,
right?
Most of which we don't know where they are. So we are essentially come from the kingdom of Judea, which were the tribes of Yehuda, Benjamin, and Levi.
Okay, so a mixture of those three.
Yeah. And there may have been some others as well, but for the most part.
Thank you.
So she says in verse 25, "To the man that these belong to, I am pregnant. Recognize, perhaps do you know, whose signet ring this is, whose belt this is, and whose staff this is?" And Yehuda recognized them. He could have said, "No, don't recognize it." That would have been, he was in power. She was not. He could have very well saved his own shame by saying, no idea whose that is. He didn't. Vayomer, and he said, "Tzadka mimeni," she is more righteous than I. And she did this because I had not fulfilled my promise of giving her Shelah, my son. Very, very powerful moment where Yehuda redeems himself. He becomes the one to admit a mistake publicly and take responsibility for his own actions. A very powerful moment. And here is where that comes back. And from there are born two sons. From Tamar are born two sons, Peretz and Zarach. And you may recognize these names because at the end of the story of Ruth, it says that she married Boaz, the descendant of this Peretz. From here comes David Melech Israel. From here comes Ruth. From here comes this great story. It requires a self-sacrifice, a self-perfection, a recognition of one's mistakes to be able to come back up to this point of leadership. There is so much more, but we're out of time. Just want to jump into one teaching quickly, and then we'll leave it at that. The next part goes into the story of Yosef, and Yosef is successful in the household of Potiphar, and Potiphar grows to trust him, and everything that Yosef did was successful, and everything that was in control of Potiphar's house was under his control. And the Torah tells us in verse 6 of chapter 39, it ends with Vayhi Yosef Yifei Toar V'Yifei Mara, just as his mother, it says she was beautiful in form and beautiful to look at, so too it says about Yosef. Yosef was beautiful in form and beautiful to look at. And it caught the attention of the mistress of the home, Potiphar's wife. And she tried to seduce him, and Yosef says no. And she says, how can I do that? It would be a great sin. It would be wrong. And every day she would speak to him, and every day he'd say no. Verse 11, Vayhi kahayom hazeh, and it was like this day. And he came to the house, la'asos malachto, to do his work. Ve'enish mi'anshe Vayeshev, and nobody else was there. It was a specific day, a day that he could anticipate nobody else would be home. And he came to do his work. And the Midrash tells us, the Gemara tells us, two interpretations. He came to do his work. He's a loyal servant. Doesn't make a difference whether it's a holiday and people are away or not. He has work to do. He shows up for work. The other, it says, no, he came to do his work as a euphemism. She begged him day by day, every day, every day. She seduced him, and he came to do his thing. It's a very profound thing because they are not contradictory. He came to do his work, no doubt. But he knew that she was there alone. And it didn't stop him from going. Often, we can mask that which we know we shouldn't do under the guise of those things that we say we need to do. And it's a very profound idea. That we sometimes allow ourselves into a situation that will create a mistake. It's not there yet. Yosef should have protected himself and not gone. And if we care about something so much, we would not go there. So many times we have those situations as well, where we don't want the outcome, but we're not staying away, knowing that we may end up there. And that's what this means. Yosef went to do his work like any other day. He went for a day's work, but he knew no one's in the house besides for her. And so essentially, he wasn't rejecting that the way he had every day. And then he nearly fell for it. The Midrash tells us that because of this story, Yosef was supposed to have 12 tribes like his father, because he was a replacement for Esav, and Esav was supposed to have 12 tribes, so he would have as well. He lost 10 on that day. And so he only had 2 tribes after that. Again, the Torah here is teaching us so many subtleties in how we need to act and how we need to contain ourselves, how we need to grow, how we need to interact with others, to learn about them. So much of these stories are the depth of our understanding from them of how we need to elevate ourselves to become the better people we can be, to live the missions that we can fulfill, and to interact with people with the utmost respect and ability to live with them by recognizing the value of each and every person and the role they play in those goals.